virus became a pandemic, and many of us are on lockdown here in the States and around the globe as well. So I'm grateful to those who continue to stay engaged with us on the Yemen cause. My name is Jehan Hakim, and I'm the chair of the Yemeni Alliance Committee, a team of Yemeni-Americans from all fields that came together after the Muslim ban. We've been focusing on advocating for Yemeni-Americans and resisting anti-Yemeni policies. Today, we're going to be remembering 5 years of war in Yemen, which is a conversation with Yemeni-American activists, women from around the country who've been fighting against U.S. involvement in the Saudi-led war in Yemen. And I've received your questions, and we will try to cover them all. Before I begin, I wanted to tell you who we'll be hearing from today. And in honor of Women's History Month, a shout out to all of our speakers and all of the amazing women doing amazing things. First, we have Dr. Aisha Jumaan, who's from Seattle. She is the founder of Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, also known as YRRF. It's the organization that the Yemeni Alliance Committee supports and promotes all the time. It's the only one that we trust, quite frankly. And it is a nonprofit charity that aims to provide relief to the people of Yemen and support peace-building efforts. Dr. Aisha manages and coordinates health-funded projects in Yemen, including in the field of epidemiology and support for public health laboratories. Next, we have Dr. Aisha Al-Adeimi, who's from Michigan. She was born in Aden in Yemen, and now is an assistant professor of education at Michigan State University. Through her writing and advocacy, she's been raising awareness about the role of the U.S. in the war in Yemen. And you can find her writings in These Times magazine. Next, we have Hanan Yahya, who is also from Michigan. She's a first-generation Yemeni-American who was raised in Detroit. She graduated from University of Michigan, where she studied urban studies and entrepreneurship. And she currently works as the community and policy coordinator for a Detroit City Council member. And she's a Yemeni Alliance Committee's rep in Michigan. She curates and launches a traveling exhibit called Stories Never Told, featuring 24 Yemeni artists from around the world, highlighting their stories amidst Yemen's crises and artist renaissance. Please check her out. Lastly, we have Somia Elrowmeim from New York. She is a Yemeni-American organizer, educator, and advocate. She moved to the States in 2007, and she serves as the chair and on the board of Action Corps. She's the founder of Women Empowerment Coalition of New York City that aims to build power and unity among women from diverse communities through dialogue. And Somia believes that change in the White House has to start locally, and organizing is the answer. I agree. Before we begin our chat, I wanted to catch folks up and give a little background on how we got here. So for those who may not know, Yemen is the second largest sovereign state in the Arab Peninsula. We border Oman and Saudi Arabia. It has a population of over 28 million. It's home to mocha coffee, home to the rarest dragon's blood trees, and home to Queen of Sheba, or Seba. I don't want to delve too far back, but I welcome folks to read about Yemen's history before we became known for poverty and war. Fast forward to the Arab Spring. Similar to Egypt and Tunisia, Yemen also participated in the Arab Spring in 2011. But the political transition led to mass unrest. So in September of 2014, internal factions reached their peak between some of the tribes, mainly those who we've now come to know as Houthis, who were beefing with the internationally recognized Yemeni government, led by the runaway president, known as Hadi, ultimately resulting in a civil war. And when those factions were not able to be contained, a plan of foreign intervention was en route. And on the eve of March 26, 2015, 5 years ago, Saudi Arabia launched airstrikes on Yemen, abruptly escalating a civil war into a regional inferno. And since then, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and its coalition, which include the Arab countries of Kuwait, Bahrain, Sudan, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, backed and supported by the US and the UK, have been bombing Yemen. And it has not been a civil war for years now. The United States, under the Obama administration, provided the coalition with weapons from US-made bomb manufacturers such as Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and Boeing. The US also provides logistical and intelligence support as Saudi warplanes drop bombs on Yemeni civilians. And up until recently, the US helped refuel coalition jets mid-air. So when the warplanes were hovering above, instead of landing and fueling up, the US would refuel mid-air. We're told that this has stopped. Here we are 5 years later, and under the Trump administration, who's allowed Saudi Arabia's rivalry with Iran to dictate its policy in the region. And it comes at the cost of innocent lives of Yemenis. The same Trump who promised to ban Muslims via the Muslim ban, which is still in effect and has been for 3 years. The US is helping bomb the same country it is banning. The irony, right? So I wanted to jump in and ask our Yemeni American women who have been advocates since 2014 or even since before about, here we are 5 years later. I want to hear on a personal level, how do each of you feel, how did you feel about hearing about the war in Yemen, being so far away? Are any of your families impacted? And also, more importantly, how did you get involved in this work? I think a lot of people are so concerned about what's going on, but not really too many either know what to do or feel like they can do anything. But all of us here have been really vocal about what's happening in Yemen. So if you can, please share with us on a personal level how this war has impacted you. Aisha.
Thank you, Jehan, very much. And first of all, I'm delighted and honored to be with all of you on this call. It's for me, it's also heartwarming to see a lot of young Yemeni American women being very active and doing a wonderful job. In terms of the war, it's actually, it's been a nightmare from day one. When I woke up and heard about the bombing of Yemen and Sana'a, because that's where the bombing started. I have, all my family and friends and colleagues in Yemen. I tried frantically to call everybody. And of course, when they started bombing, they also bombed communication towers. So it was very challenging to get through to Yemen to make sure that everybody was fine and okay. But on top of that also is that where my family lives is Fajatan, and that is the area that would hit most, almost on a daily basis. And the largest bomb was actually, dropped in that area. So I could not sleep for days, if not months, because every night I would stay, concerned that I would wake up. If I slept, that I would wake up to the news that my family is all gone. Like many other families I know, I've had families and family members and friends whose the whole family got bombed into their homes. There is a family of, distant family members of ours. They were 4 brothers and sisters who lived in one building, each one of them in an apartment. That building was bombed, and every single member of those 4 families died, except one boy who was with my nephew in our home. So that's the horror that Yemeni families had to live through. And that's the horror that I experienced, especially because there was really nothing that would prompt such an attack on Yemen. And especially because 2 days earlier to the bombing, the Yemeni coalitions, all the Yemeni factions had met with the envoy to Yemen, the UN envoy to Yemen at that point in time, Jamal bin Umar, and they agreed to a peaceful resolution to their differences. And he went and announced it, that the Yemeni factions that have been meeting have reached an agreement. On that day, he was called into Saudi Arabia, and within one day, the Saudis started bombing Yemen. So it was very clear that they did not want the Yemeni to reach an agreement, and they wanted to attack the Yemeni people. And what the sad thing about it is that it was announced from Washington, D.C., and not from Riyadh. For me, as a Yemeni American, and under the Obama administration, that was heartbreaking. And as I understand it, and even now the Obama administration officials are writing about it, it was never discussed. Everybody was trying to please Saudi Arabia so they can have the Iran deal. And so the Yemeni people were sacrificed to have the support of the Saudi for the Iran deal. And where is the Iran deal right now? It is unacceptable that they made the decision to make the Yemeni people the sacrificial lamb for something that we don't even have right now.
Thank you, Aisha. Shireen Al-Adeimi, what are your thoughts? How has it been for you being so far away? And like Dr. Aisha said, just hearing that Yemen is now on the news for something that is not what we all know or are used to. The beautiful architecture, no, it's on the news because it's being bombed by the world's largest superpower.
I mean, it's heartbreaking to even think about the fact that it's been 5 years. We're entering the 5th year, and my heart sinks to even think about that. As you know, we're not talking about weeks and months anymore. Now we're talking years, and the suffering has just continued to exceed any kind of expectation, I think, or any kind of, our imaginations, really. We never thought that this would last so long. Similar to Dr. Aisha Jumaan, I was just, my whole life turned upside down on March 26, 2015. And then to know that this was fully supported and completely backed militarily, logistically, by the United States under President Obama, and nobody really wanting to agitate or to question that for so many years was really it's what sprung me to action, but also it was incredibly difficult to work during those times. It's still difficult to do this work, but it was especially difficult when nobody was willing to challenge it. When it was Obama's war, it became easier for people to challenge it when it became Trump's war. But from the very beginning, for me, it was a matter of, what can we do now? Because we can wait around to see what others are doing. And then at some point you realize nobody's doing anything. And this is home. For me, it's home. And if I'm going to be waiting around, then I'm part of the problem as well. And so I decided to do whatever I could at the time to support an end to the war. My message has been the same all throughout the 5 years, that we're not calling for the US to come rescue us. We're calling for the very opposite. This is a call of non-intervention. This is a call of ending all intervention in Yemen and allowing people to dictate their own lives, allowing people to actually be sovereign and to solve their issues without the need for intervening in people's lives. We just got to keep going. And I've been inspired by the many people who've joined the movement, but we still have a long way to go.
Yes, indeed. I know when we hear sovereign nation, what does that even mean? That means that a region has full autonomy over what the country or the region decides to do. It is not up to the foreign actors to come in and, like you said, rescue Yemen. I think that historically we've had a grip on things until geopolitics got involved. I think as the West is realizing how much profit is generated from arms and the exchange of interests, that we are seeing this just revamping of imperialism and militarism. Thank you, Shireen, for sharing. Somia, how have you felt, or how did you feel initially? I know it's been 5 years. It's so heavy to even say that it's been 5 years. We look at Syria, I know we look at Afghanistan, and we just, this is not just a number. It's been 365 days times 5 years. It's a really, really long time, and this war should have ended years ago. But here we are. Somia, how do you feel after 5 years of war? And what has inspired you to do this work?
Yeah, I'm like, you already said all things that how is every Yemeni feels. Actually 5 years of sadness, of also suffering, seeing your, own people suffered every single day. Like, it really hurts. It makes you, it's like, it makes you overwhelmed. And especially when you feel like there is no much things to do. And you try all, like, you put all your power, you try to do whatever you can do, you try, like, to make it work out, but like at the end of the day it's really hard, you cannot. And for me, because like I work with the Yemeni community in New York City, and I see how each one of them are suffer, especially the people who has family in Yemen, and people who's like, as we know, like Yemen is one of the most, like, the country that banned from coming to United States, and some of them, they still have family in Djibouti, in Malaysia, and Egypt, and they stuck over there. They cannot go back to Yemen because of the war, and they cannot bring them here. And it's really difficult for them to work like 2-shift work. Sometimes they work 18 hours a day to support those families, and they still have families at Yemen and families in United States, and also families in Djibouti or Malaysia. And it's really difficult, like, it's really overwhelmed them. And I see, like, and how many cases we heard about people who suicide, killed themselves because they couldn't handle it. It's really difficult for them. And for me, as like Somia personally, I have family members who's in Yemen, and I see them how they are struggling every single day. And I know that like they are not safe, because my family is in Sana'a. And lately, in last, like, it's almost like 10 months ago, like they bombed my neighborhood, and I lost a lot of friends who's like used to be my friends in my neighbor. And like my house were damaged, but like, alhamdulillah, my family, it's like they are good, there is nothing happened to them. But like the people who I know, the friend who I grow with, it's like, it's really hard. It's like makes you feel like you lost those people, and you pay like tax, and this tax dollars, it kills your beloved one and the people who you know very closely. And also from this war, I lost also like family members, cousins, who's like, I lost 4 cousins who died in this endless war. That's what brings me in. That's what makes me feel like, no, it's time. We have to speak up. We have to organize ourselves. We have to be united, and we have to evaluate our voice and speak. Like, I understand that it's really hard, especially in our community now. It's a little bit divided, but like we can do it. We can do it because we have the right to do it.
Thank you, Somia. That is so inspiring. I agree that we have the right and the obligation to do it. As taxpayers, we are entitled to know where our money is going. And if it is indeed going to fund endless wars, then we have, as a duty to speak against it. So thank you for sharing. Hanan, you are the youngest among us, and you represent the youth, the future. And I know that, like each of us have shared that this work is so difficult, and I commend everyone for being consistent. How's it been for you, Hanan?
First of all, thank you, Jehan, for hosting. Thank you to the other participants on this call. I respect and commend you all, like my older sisters, and as leaders in our community. And I'm privileged to join you all on this platform. I think as a, when the conflicts just first started, I was in college. I was studying abroad. I was, doing organizing work in my community, and my background is in organizing and is in kind of mobilizing the community through higher education and such. And so I think there's like 2 pieces. It's working with the youth and being a youth member, right? Being amongst these folks in the community, and then also kind of trying to battle with the older folks, the adults, the elders in our community and their mindsets and their approach to the work. And I think what we struggle with is falling in the we feel like we're on fine lines in between both, that we don't really understand how the world works, how the conflict really unfolded. A lot of youth feel like they need to take sides, that they need to support their parents' views, and that's inherently I think the wrong way to approach this entire thing. And then we have in general this problem in our community, and with my family and with other immigrant communities, that we're first generation, where our first priority is survival, is growing in our economic stability. It is sending our kids to school. It is understanding the laws of the land. And I think we're still in that process of assimilating to life in the US. I mean, I'm a first generation immigrant, my family is. And so for us, this whole time has been about survival. And now that we've kind of been educated and we're entering this, we have, second generation, younger folks, we are trying to re-educate ourselves with the political process and with our political power. And that's why I'm involved in local government. That is where my passion lies. And that is why my role is kind of to mobilize and to educate and to support. And I have a long way to go, but I know the community has a long way to go too, in terms of re-education and finding our political voice. And there have been groups that have been growing in this regard, but again, the divisiveness, the disheartening nature of this work is a lot to go up against. And so that's why you find a lot of young people who just step away, who just, want to fundraise and feel like that's all I can do, or, who just do what they can and they focus on survival, right? So that's kind of been my approach to this work, my perspective. And I could talk about the exhibit that I was working on for the past couple of years, and how that has opened my eyes and provided a different type of perspective to this topic overall.
Thank you, Hanan, for sharing. MashaAllah, we have a great group of folks who've been active in their respective areas and their respective fields. I got into this work. Previously, I used to work on immigration, or a legal organization working on immigration and national security and kind of how it intersects with Islamophobia. And I began as protesting. We would protest and we would go out into the streets with our flags and our signs and our banners, and we want to let everyone know that this is wrong, and there's just competition for the limelight, and there's so many causes going, there's so much oppression, and it was it got to the point where our protesting wasn't working, or it wasn't enough. So that's where Yemeni Alliance Committee kind of was born, through that frustration. And we began kind of shifting some of our strategies and doing more lobby visits and, signing on to different lawsuits or different, trying to push different legislations, teaming up with congressional folks and all the other anti-war organizations, where we've come to the point where folks know who we are and they're listening. But like, so many have said that it is just, we have so much, the battle is just, it's only uphill, because this is a huge, like I said, it's a huge revenue maker. And there's a lot of money that comes in from the kingdom and from some of these other Gulf countries that funds a lot of corporations, and a lot of our political elite are intertwined with these companies. So their money is invested. So it's been really overwhelming, and I cannot cannot forget how after the first bombing occurred, it happened at night. I think we're in the middle of the night, and how I communicate with families through WhatsApp. And I just remember having so much anxiety when I don't hear from my relatives via WhatsApp. And as many folks know, our electricity back home is on and off, since the 90s. It's been on and off. And my family's from Ib, so it's very regular for electricity to be off. But I mean, is it off due to the shortage, or is it off because my family's home has been striked? So it's been this way for 5 years. So it's extremely stressful and draining. So, just want to paint a picture for folks to understand that this work is not just a campaign. It's not just something that we're doing part-time. We're all doing different jobs. We have a different 9 to 5, and this has kind of become our 24/7, and it's so emotionally taxing. Because it's something that we can't just go and take our loved ones and bring them here. And even if, is that even the answer? I mean, basically we want Yemen to remain a sovereign nation, and for the US and other foreign actors to just get out. Let us handle our own business, right? So thank you everyone for sharing. I want to turn the mic over to Dr. Aisha, the founder of YRRF, who will help us understand what it's looking like on the ground, and kind of how the needs of Yemenis has changed since you first started helping those in need, Aisha.
Thank you, Jehan. Like you said, when the bombing started in Yemen, the first thing I realized that people are going to need, they're going to need support. Because there was also an imposed blockade immediately with the bombing. And since Yemen imports 90% of their food, medicine, and fuel and essential goods, that was a clear sign that the situation in Yemen was going to become a disaster in terms of the humanitarian aspects. And that's why Yemen RRF was established and born. Initially, starting 2015, I was sending my own money to different places where there were bombings and people weren't able to get out of their homes. I would reach out to colleagues and friends and I say, I'll send you this money. Would you please go and do something for me in this area? And again, we all, like Shireen said, we all thought this was going to be a short-lived war. The Saudis said 2 months, and then actually they announced that they're going to restore hope in Yemen, which I don't know what hope to them means, but it's basically there is no hope that comes from that country. It's always been death and destruction. And so more friends were calling me and asking me how we can help. And a lot of people were donating. And at one point in time, I realized that I was receiving a lot of funds from friends in the US to support Yemen. And that's when I decided, okay, this is going for a long time. And in 2017, we registered Yemen Relief for Reconstruction Foundation in the state of Washington. And we applied for a 501c3 status, which we got, and we're very grateful for that. The situation in 2015 was much better, and it only goes downhill from there. So if you have a country that got blockade under siege, if people see movies about the Middle Ages and they look at what a siege means, you basically cut off anything going into that area that you besieged. And you want them to die, basically. So in addition to that, in addition to the blockade on Yemen, the Saudis also were bombing purposefully anything that produces food, whether it's chicken farms, whether it's pomegranate fields, anything that was a food production, they bombed it. So what happened with that is whatever was in Yemen, and they were only allowing about 20% of the goods to get into Yemen. So the first year, 2015, there was enough in the country. They didn't feel the burden as much. But as we progress now, we're entering the 6th year. Imagine only allowing 20% to get into the country every year. So by the end, and in addition to that, because they bombed a lot of the businesses, a lot of people were laid off. And then in 2016, they moved the central bank from Sana'a. And now all the public servants in Yemen have no salaries. So that is a planned economic warfare on the population of Yemen, on 28 to 29 million people. And so the situation just really got worse over time, whether it's in terms of, and Yemen is called the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. And what's sad about it, it's actually a man-made humanitarian crisis in the world. It's not due to a coronavirus, like everybody now. In the US and everywhere else, they're hoarding food and supplies. The Yemenis didn't have a warning about this. They were bombed in the middle of the night. They were blockaded in the middle of the night. And if you happen to be in any airport in the world flying to Yemen that day, you got stuck. We had someone whom we were training in the US and he was flying out of the US. He got into Jordan and he couldn't go back to Yemen. And so this is one story of thousands of stories of what's going on in Yemen. Yemen now is suffering quite a bit, whether it's in, again, everything is not there, whether you're talking about food, and if it's there, people cannot afford it. Medicine is also, I visit Yemen every summer, and it's just an ordeal, by the way, to go to Yemen. It takes me 4 days from the time I leave my home in Seattle to the time I get to my home, my parents' home in Sana'a. That's 4 days each way. That's 8 days. And if for all of us who are working, imagine, if you're just taking 8 days to get in and out of where you need to live, that eats up a lot of your time. So that's where we are. There've been a lot of statistics. There've been a lot of horrific numbers. And as someone said, when we talk about one person, it's the killing or the suffering of one person, it's a tragedy. When you're talking about millions, it's just statistics. And that breaks my heart because the numbers in Yemen are staggering. We have 80% of the population are in need of some aid today. And if you talk about people with cancer, just the multiple outbreaks that are going there, I'd like to share some information about the outbreaks that have been going on. This is data from this past Sunday. So if we look at, I'm going to start with the cholera because Yemen is suffering the largest cholera outbreak in the world. Up to 2019, we had over 2 million suspected cases. In this day and age, we should not have that many cases of cholera. Okay, so this slide shows the number of cholera cases for the first 3 months comparing 2018, 2019, and 2020. And as you can see, the number in 2020 are 71,849, just only in 3 months. And this is not the rainy season in Yemen, which means the numbers are going to get even more. And that's just really extremely frustrating because this can be dealt with if they allow enough fuel into the country and the reactivation of the water system, because they destroyed with all their airstrikes a lot of the water system in Yemen. If we look at the diphtheria outbreak again, I mean, Yemen was free of diphtheria since 1980. Imagine from 1980, there was no diphtheria in Yemen. And now we have a diphtheria outbreak that's been going on for 3 years. And if you look at the fatality rate from diphtheria in Yemen, it's 7%. Compare that to the coronavirus fatality rate of 1.4% that's been reported to the highest of 4%. And everybody is quite upset with those fatality rates. Look at the diphtheria fatality rate in Yemen. These children, especially children, do not deserve to die from a preventable disease. If we look at dengue, I mean, when it rains, it pours. And unfortunately, because about 50% of the health services in Yemen and the health infrastructure was bombed, the health system in Yemen has become worse. This is dengue fever. Again, it's if you look at the numbers in the last few, since the end of last year, we see quite a lot of numbers. So there are about 29,000 cases just in the first quarter of this year. And again, this is something that can be prevented if we have a health system that can take care of that. Again, here the fatality rate is about 0.3%. And finally, especially now where everybody is concerned about corona, Yemen has been suffering from SARI, which is severe acute respiratory infections. And if we look at the first quarter of this year, there are about 1,759 cases with a 5% fatality rate. That's higher than any fatality rates due to corona. And this is H1N1. This is not COVID. Yeah, this is not the coronavirus. And because the health system is weak, they're not able to deal with it. What is frightening to me today is that if coronavirus enters Yemen, there is no way they're going to be able to deal with it. The health system is not functional enough to be able to deal with it. And and we don't have a vaccine, we don't have medicine. And if we're talking about a 50% capacity health system in Yemen, which would, compared to the US or Italy, for example, that 50% capacity would probably be about 5% of what the US has. So we're not even talking about 50%. So if and thank God, up to date, there are no coronavirus cases in Yemen. They've tested some suspected cases. The Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation was fortunate to get donations of reagents for the coronavirus from the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin, and we were able to deliver it to the labs in Aden and Sana'a. And so they've been using them to test suspected cases. And to date, there are no cases. But I'm actually terrified of the potential of having corona in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha, for sharing. It's so hard to look at or hear these numbers and compare it to the rest of the world and how everyone is, feeling claustrophobic, and there's so much hysteria going around COVID, and everyone is being locked up in their homes, and seeing as there's a blockade, there are airstrikes, there's a Muslim ban, the airport is closed. There is so much up against the people of Yemen. And I think just want to remind folks that these numbers, they represent people with families, people who had hopes and they had dreams, and they really, wanted a future just like all of us. So it's, it's just so tough to hear about the impact, how extremely devastating it is. And as a parent, I cannot even imagine what it's like to have a child with cholera or diphtheria or dengue fever and not have any equipment or supplies or even capacity in the, healthcare institutions to be able to take care of that. If we look at our lives here in the States, if something happens to us or our families, even with the kind of the chaos that we're experiencing now with corona, we can still go to the ER and we can call our ER nurse. We can go to the pharmacy to get what we need. But the people of Yemen are not in a position where that is a reality. So thank you for sharing, Aisha. I wanted to quickly just ask now, you said rainy season, and here we are, spring is approaching, and with the threat of corona, what do Yemenis need now the most?
So for the coronavirus, in terms of needs, although they have now for the public health labs, the reagents, we need fast screening. And the two countries that have the reagents for fast screenings are China and South Korea. And I've been talking to different labs, including, contacting both, the embassies of South Korea and China to see if they can donate rapid tests, because it's possible that we have cases that have not been tested. Right now, they test people who have symptoms. And as we know, about 80% of the population would not have symptoms, but are infecting others. And the infection rate is quite high with this virus. So every person infects 2.5 to 3 people. So basically, it spreads real fast. And we also need for the blockade to be ended. So, everything that needs to be coming into the country needs to come in freely. So the reagents that we were able to secure for the H1N1 and for coronavirus, we had to ship them to Jordan, and then we asked the WHO office to ship to Yemen. Believe it or not, they were not able to ship the coronavirus reagents to Yemen. They had to ship them with travelers. Imagine that. And that's because of the blockade. In the middle of an outbreak that is devastating economies and countries around the world, the Saudis would not lift the blockade or allow reagents to get into Yemen freely. That's the kind of, in my mind, criminality that's going on. So they need to have a lot of experts that can help them and guide them through the process of, isolation. Right now, the government is trying to do its best, especially the government in Sana'a. They have isolation centers, but those are not going to be enough if we do have a widespread of the virus. So they need help with that as well. So all the response, the immediate response that needs to happen, they need support with it. I know that today the Minister of Health in Sana'a had announced forming 330 teams, each team of 5 people, so they can send them rapidly to places where they need care. I don't know what care they can provide, to be honest. They don't have the medicine to provide care. So they need the medicine. There are at least some studies that are coming out talking about chloroquine as an option and other medicines. Yemen needs to have access to those medications. And again, the screening part, the quarantine part of that, and lifting the blockade and allowing the free flow of needs into Yemen, definitely.
Thank you, Aisha. That is really helpful. And we can send the statistics and share it with our audience. I want to pass the mic to Shireen, who will help us understand what the U.S. has kind of been doing, like what is the role of the U.S. in this war, and what's been done to really tackle the role of the U.S. in its support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen.
Well, first of all, thank you, Aisha, for those statistics. And it really is sobering. It's frightening. It's terrifying that Yemen has already been dealing with issues that nobody else on earth is dealing right now. This is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. This is as bad as it can get. And yet we are now bracing for the god-awful possibility that this could even get worse, which is so incredibly difficult to imagine, and speaks to the urgency of what's going on and the work that needs to be done. The US has been a partner in crime to the Saudis since the beginning. Obama had announced the day of the bombing, the day that the war began, that he is in full support of the Saudi-led coalition, that he was providing weapons and intelligence and logistical assistance. And at the time, it turns out that all of this is in violation of the US Constitution. It's in violation of our own laws here in this country. And the war that Trump inherited then also is unconstitutional. And so the US specifically has been training Saudi soldiers. They've been advising Saudi military personnel. They provide targeting assistance. So there are US commanders in the command room choosing targets alongside the Saudis and the Emiratis. they have been maintaining, repairing, and updating vehicles and aircraft. So even if the US doesn't sell weapons and aircrafts to the Saudis, they still help them maintain and update those vehicles and the aircrafts. And we read reports of the US Special Forces known as the Green Berets that were present at the Yemeni-Saudi border, which essentially constitutes direct combat. And according to a 2018 article, there were 100 by the army. There were 123 contracts with the Saudis that totaled $120 million per month. And of course, this doesn't speak to the 115 billion or so sold in arms during the Obama administration and the 110 billion or so sold in arms under the Trump administration. And up until 2018, November of 2018, the Saudis were refueling mid-air, as you mentioned earlier, Jehan. And what this leaves then is the entire population barely able to survive. We're talking over 80% of the population that's in need of humanitarian aid. Millions lack access to fuel, to water. Many of these diseases that you mentioned, Aisha, are preventable. Children should not be suffering through this. Nobody should be suffering through this. And yet here we are with 14 million people, or half the population, facing famine because they're not allowed to import like they had been. They're not allowed to grow anything or to have any functioning factories because they get bombed. And so it's as oppressive as it can get. And the US has been supporting the Saudis and the Emiratis every step of the way. And this is in fact a word that maybe people are not used to hearing when it comes to Yemen. But according to Genocide Watch, this constitutes as a genocide emergency, and they have 10 levels, and the 9th level is what they designate Yemen as, which is extermination. And the only level after extermination is denial, which happens after the committing of the mass murders. And so we are at the highest level, essentially, and yet this continues with US support, full US support, and without much international scrutiny. And in fact, international actors have either joined in and participated. Countries like Canada, for example, doesn't provide troops, but they do sell billions in weapons to the Saudis. And they've either benefited from the relationship essentially and made their money, made their billions, or they've stayed quiet in the margins because they're not, interested in making enemies out of the US, so to speak. And so it's, it's an international attack. I think calling it a war is at this point criminal. It's an international attack and a genocide that's perpetuated against the people of Yemen.
Yeah, it's one thing to hear that the war in Yemen has been called a forgotten war. It's been off of the radar and media is hardly picking it up. I know a lot of us struggle to try to get some of our stories and actions out there in order to penetrate mainstream, but to hear that Yemen is in level 9 and we are still not, the war in Yemen is still not even being recognized as one that so many foreign actors are not only involved in, but are perpetuating this humanitarian crisis that, like Dr. Aisha said, is man-made, is beyond me. But there has been some work where a lot of us have been supporting, thank God. And if you can please give us an overview of some of the legislative limbo around holding the U.S. accountable for its role in the war in Yemen. We rally and we lobby, and we've had a joint resolution passed through both chambers. It was bipartisan, and then it gets vetoed. And it's just so many political loopholes that many of us have been jumping or, trying to push. Give us a brief history, if you can, about, I think Representative Ro Khanna introduced the War Powers resolutions back in 2016. And a lot of us come on social media and we send out action alerts about please call your congressional member and tell them to vote on acronym number, right? So give our viewers kind of a history of how this, legislative limbo has been for Yemen.
So it hurts to say this, but 85,000 children from the ages 0 to 5 who have died of starvation and disease were not enough to move people to action. Many people don't know about it. Many people, when they find out about it, feel helpless. But it, like I mentioned earlier, it turned out that all of this U.S. assistance was illegal, and so we decided to pursue this through legislation. And since 2017, Ro Khanna came along in California, junior congressman, and just launched this incredible, push in the House to introduce the War Powers Act of 1973, which was introduced after news of Nixon's secret bombing of Cambodia was leaked to journalists in 1973. And it basically gives power to Congress and not the president to declare war. Of course, every president since then has violated this act, but Congress has never challenged them on this. And, they've reprimanded here and there, but have never really challenged it until they kind of came together. It took years for this war powers to get passed in Congress, as you mentioned, Jehan. And there were many starts and pauses because we had a Republican-controlled House that, first we had the Democrats who didn't want to do anything about it when it was Obama's war. Then we had the Republicans and didn't want to do anything about it because it was Trump's war. So there was a lot of politics that many of us had to navigate through. But in the end, it passed in 2019 with Senator Sanders teaming up with Chris Murphy and Republican Senator Mike Lee in the Senate, and then Republican Ro Khanna in the House. And Congress finally passed its first War Powers Bill in 2019. Of course, what took years to pass ended up taking minutes for Trump to veto. And we saw it coming. We knew it was going to get vetoed. He talked very openly about his relationship with the Saudis and how they pay in cash. But it was still heartbreaking and demoralizing, I think, nonetheless. And then last summer, there was a push through the National Defense Authorization Act to try to defund the war and have provisions in the Defense Act to prevent this U.S. logistical intelligence sharing with the Saudis. And unfortunately, Democratic leadership under Nancy Pelosi kind of dropped the ball and hasn't pursued that. So Trump got his Space Force, and we didn't get, the amendments that we needed to defund the war in Yemen. What's next is to keep going. The War Powers Act can be invoked over and over by any member of Congress. There is no time limit on that. And it is still illegal. The veto is in violation of the Constitution. So this is something we need to pursue. And we need to remind our Congress people and senators that we need to keep this issue alive, and they are responsible for the genocide that's happening in Yemen. And they should take leadership in ending the war. Again, the ask is not to intervene. The ask is to stop U.S. intervention in Yemen.
That's right. Thank you, Shireen, for that. It's been really confusing to a lot of our followers of what is the call to action now? But like Shireen said, whatever the name of the resolution is that we're trying to push at any given moment, it is all under the umbrella of anti-intervention, anti-military action in the sovereign country of Yemen. I want to go into the organizing piece because I think that's really crucial, and it's kind of like how the grassroots advocacy efforts work. And I want to invite Somia, who's a super grassroots organizer from New York and has been involved in mobilizing communities of color for a really long time. Somia, great to have you on the call. Can you describe some of the challenges that you faced working in other movements and, trying to create space for Yemen?
Yeah. In the beginning, actually, what it keeps us first, advocate and strong, it's getting each other back. And those amazing women who's in the webinar, they are really have been helpful to me, and they had done so much work to support me emotionally and also with advices. Thank you so much for you all. Actually, organizing people is not easy work. as we know, organizing, it's really difficult, especially like organizing, it's actually two kinds. It's like organizing money and organizing people. Since we didn't have money, we do organizing people. And we had done actually so much work. First of all, I want to thank our allies who support us, like people from Action Corps and other organization who's like always supporting us around in New York City. And always like they show up when we need them and when we ask them for help and support. Actually, the biggest problem that it faced me is the money that comes from Saudi Arabia and like certain Gulf countries that turn the Yemeni people against each other. It's like some people, they just change their position. They were like, supporting us, like they were like organizing with us, but like, they just changed their position, they flip out because like, the money. And that's one of the biggest challenges it faced me, to make sure that I'm working with the people they don't have any interest unless like their interest, it's like to stop the war in Yemen. That's all. It's not because they have another like, something in the back. Because it's really difficult now in this work to get to know who can help you and really believe in your mission. We had done so many work as a lobbying, rallies, vigils, and also protests, workshop. And before all the organizing, we had done so much work to educate people and raise awareness about what's happening in Yemen. Because many people, they don't know what's going on, especially allies, and some Arab people, they don't know what is the problem and who against who. And especially because our community are divided, and some of them, they were with the war, and some of them like against the war. But like now, after 5 years of the war, because people, they thought, as Aisha said, it's only 2 months war and to solve problems. I don't know what they had, what kind of like, like plan they had. And we end up having war for 5 years. People are suffering, people are dying every single day. Kids are dying because of the cholera, of like, lack of medicine. And schools have been bombed, and also hospitals. Now people, they realize that this war was like wrong since the beginning. Especially the people who we are supporting Saudi coalition, they start like now waking up and see that the only person who's affected from this war is the Yemeni people, no one else. So like, as I said, like we had done a lot of work. Lately we did we did like workshops, presentations, training for new organizers in Washington, D.C. And we got support from Oxfam America. And we trained 25 new members who's really have this, goal, and they want just to stop the war in Yemen and around the world. It's not only in Yemen. It's just like they are against war, against killing innocent people. And like we saw that the new blood, the new generation are like, some of them, they don't understand what's going on, why the policy, like why they doing that. And that's where like we realize that education is also very important as much as organizing. And also, as I said, like we had a lot of meetings. We met with Senator Schumer, and we spoke about the airport, and we asked him that to support us with a letter to open Sana'a airport, because a lot of people are suffering, and also like to release the ships that the 8 ships that they lock it in the port. And like, but like the things, like we got all this, and we end up like not seeing it happening in the real life. Like he promised us, and like we got a lot of promises, but like nothing happened. Because what? Because of the money of the Gulf countries. It's in everything. And sometimes we feel that we are hopeless and nothing has changed. But like when we look at each other and when we talk to our families in our country, and they remind us that we are we are the only hope for them to do what we are doing. And that's what makes me feel like, no, I have to keep going. I always tell myself I'm tired, because I don't have this power to stop those countries who has a lot of money. The only things that I have, it's to organize people. But when I remember why I'm doing that, that's relieve me and makes me feel like, no, it's empowering me, makes me feel like, no, what I'm doing is the right things, and I just have to keep going no matter what.
Thank you, Somia. It's always inspiring to hear, why you do this work. I think a lot of us get so exhausted. And like you said, our community is so divided, and many lawmakers also get a lot of that money from lobbyists, Saudi lobbyists, lobbyists from Gulf countries that are coming to meetings with big bags of money. I can't tell you how many times I tried to book a meeting with Speaker Nancy Pelosi and to be rejected, but a Saudi lobbyist is more than welcome to come and bring his perspective on why America should support the Saudi-led coalition. And like you said, allies, I do want to give a quick shout out to Action Corps, to Just Foreign Policy, Win Without War, FCNL, Congressional Representative Ro Khanna, Senator Sanders. There's so many amazing people that we have on our side. And this work is straining and it's tiring, and it's this war machine is such a big beast. But thank you for reminding us that when I do talk to back home, they're always telling me, we're so proud of all the work our Yemeni women are doing. All of our, they call us Queen of Shebas, that we're doing, uplifting their voices, because a lot of our people just feel like they've been silenced and forgotten. And we do this work so they won't be silenced and so they won't be forgotten. So I know Somia has to get off, but thank you so much for sharing. And we're going to pass the mic now to Hanan, who has spoken at many rallies and different events, and she's really engaged with the youth and is our Yemeni Alliance Committee representative out there in Michigan. And I want to hear from you about, how are young folks feeling about this war? Young Yemeni-Americans, youth around the world, and how their voices are often not heard or acknowledged. I know this is a problem across the board for young folks, but in particular, how do they feel about this war?
Thank you. That is a great question. I think the answer to the question is multifaceted. When we talk about Yemeni American youth, we're talking about recent refugees, we're talking about new immigrants who are in our school systems, who are matriculating to life here, who have been impacted by the war firsthand and are just learning to be new Americans and heal from the trauma of being in a war-torn country. And so I think a lot of them are still healing, the ones here in the US, the ones who were raised here and still feel connected to Yemen through family and through the impact of the conflict. They are also sometimes straddling these two identities, these two sides, which side do I choose? Kind of listening to what their families say, not understanding what the political structures are like. The civic engagement numbers, voter turnout numbers in the Yemeni American community are very low, and there are very few people doing this work, and so that's the part that's very difficult. And then when we talk about youth, Yemeni youth in the diaspora, in Yemen, but also in the diaspora, a lot of them are suffering from displacement. A lot of them are suffering from the impact of not getting a visa, not being able to travel for their studies, not being able to access opportunities for their future. And the reason why I understand this, and I've come to learn more about this in the way that we can all learn about this, is by following artists and young people who are on social media, who share their experiences, who share the impact of the crisis crises through their work. The exhibit that I curated, Stories Never Told, features 24 Yemeni artists from around the world who have lived the crises experiences in a different way. Some folks were not allowed to enter the US via the Muslim ban. Some folks are stuck in a foreign country like Malaysia or South Korea because they're finishing their studies, but they don't have financial stability. They have to support their families. They don't know what their future looks like. And you see that their art is very powerful. It's impressive. It's world class. But here they are being impacted by this war-torn country, like, and not having access to electricity. Like, I'm always amazed by how a young person in Yemen can make such a phenomenal short film with little access to electricity, with a limited budget, with no resources, with no funding, and that just goes to show that there is talent in Yemen. There is a voice. There are voices in Yemen. There are stories that need to be told. There's huge, rise in artistic talent, and we see that coming up. There's Ramuz Foundation. There's Yemen Art Base. There is the Basement Foundation, and a lot of different other groups who are opening galleries, who are trying to streamline funding into these spaces and into these groups to inspire these artists, to give them hope, to support them. And a lot of these artists are doing it on their own. And a lot of them reflect on their experiences, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of them. I'm just, kind of reflecting based on what I have curated and what I have, read and learned from them, is that, a lot of them don't know what the future looks like. They have hope, and it's very limited, but they don't know what exactly lies in their future. That they have a lot of potential. They want to support their communities. A lot of them are not involved politically, but their art speaks for itself. And so, there are a lot of voices. What's also happening is we're seeing that their art is like finding its presence in Europe. People are writing articles about them. A lot of these young people are leaving Yemen, finding residency programs, going to study elsewhere, and taking their story with them, amplifying their voices with them. And I think it's important. I think it's important for them to be giving the resources and the tools to amplify their voices for themselves, and tell their stories. And storytelling, as we know, is so important. It's so important, especially in a country like Yemen that's facing so many challenges. And it can change the narrative. It can really change the narrative. I think one of the biggest problems with Yemen is that the narrative is being told by the wrong people. The people themselves are not given the opportunity to share their voices and speak for themselves. And the world is constantly saying, this is what Yemen needs, and this is what Yemen should have, and not asking them and giving them the tools and the resources and listening to them. And so let us just hope that they are provided with what they need moving forward, and that we can continue to support them on their journeys, and do the right thing. And I will definitely share a list of these artists and these programs and these foundations in a list afterwards, so people can follow them and share their stories.
Thank you, Hanan. I agree. I think storytelling really shapes public perception, global perception. How we know what we know is by what we've read or heard. And if we're not hearing it from those that are directly impacted by either war, genocide, the Muslim ban, all of these systems of oppression, then how will we ever know the truth, right? Yeah, thank you so much. And we are definitely going to share, all of the statistics, and, we have a toolkit as well that will help guide your talking points when you're helping us with this cause and doing your part. And the stories that Hanan just shared, we're going to be sharing them at the end. We're close to closing, and I wanted to just ask our speakers one last question. If you can tell our listeners, what is a takeaway that you want them to go away with today from this from this webinar? Aisha.
I actually, in the midst of the coronavirus, I want to remind people that 18 million people in Yemen don't have access to water, period. And that half of the 3.1 million people who are internally displaced cannot afford to buy soap. And in terms of prevention, the number one is washing your hands with soaps for at least 20 seconds. Yemeni, 18 million people of them out of the 28 don't have water. So please do something, be active, demand that this war and aggression on Yemen is ended. I also want to comment on how much money Saudis are putting into PR firms. There was a report that in 2017, they spent $27 million into lobbying just in Washington, D.C. So people, we need every voice, we need every conscience to do something and reach out to their representatives, reach out to their senators, and demand an end to the U.S. support for the war and aggression on Yemen. Without this U.S. support, this war would not have started and would not have continued. Therefore, it's upon us to demand that the U.S. ends its support, and that's how this war is going to end.
Thank you, Aisha. Shireen, any last comments?
You said it so eloquently and beautifully, but I'm just going to echo you, Dr. Aisha Jumaan, that this war and the aggression and the onslaught on Yemen is done in our name. We can't continue. We can't control anything that's happening in Yemen. We can only, we live in a country that allows us to voice our opinions and our views and to change laws that we see unfit, or to even lobby to, in this case, enforce the laws that we do have. And that is the goal of every person living here. I recently became a citizen, so I can be more engaged on this front and to, vote for the people who've been trying to end this, not the people who've started it, to really push forward, on the legislative side and to end the suffering in Yemen that is happening every single day in our name. And this is morbid, but I want people to be moved into action. In the hour and 10 minutes that we've spoken, 7 Yemeni children have died of starvation and preventable diseases like cholera and diphtheria. And so it's urgent. Yemen really can't wait.
Thank you, Shireen. And thank you for highlighting that hashtag. Hashtag Yemen can't wait has been associated with the war in Yemen for years, since its inception. Because indeed, due to all the statistics and the conditions, that Yemen cannot wait. It cannot wait another year until it ends. It cannot wait another month, another day. This is beyond urgent. And I want to pass the mic over to Hanan to you're speaking to the youth here. What do you want to tell youth?
I want to say that we have so much more political power than we think, that our government belongs to us, that we should not be afraid of not knowing enough. I think a lot of us feel like, I don't know the details of the war. I don't want to take a side. I'm not in support of this person or in support of this person. No, we need to band together, every one of us, to say no more to the U.S. involvement, and really just hold our government accountable. We are the ones, I think, the young people who have access to language, not like our parents who are still, immigrants in this country who don't speak the language. We have access to education. We have access to social media. We have all the tools, really. The only tool that we need to add is a little bit of courage and the willingness to not be afraid of speaking up and building a coalition amongst us and fighting back and saying what we have to say. And so there's nothing wrong about what we're saying. It's righteous. It's the right thing to do. And I don't want, years from now for us to look back and say, oh, I was there during this time and I never said anything, and I could have. and I had everything that I needed to do something, and I didn't. And so we need to play our role as youth, and to continue sharing our voices. We need to continue listening to the voices of Yemeni youth who are directly impacted by the war. And we need to just keep moving forward, really.
Thank you, Hanan. I think that is crucial what you said, is that tool is courage. It's an inherent characteristic that every human being has. Just tap into that. I'm going to close today with a few, action steps for everyone. And because a lot of people come and they ask, what can we do? And like Hanan said, that people do not realize our political strength. Our lawmakers are elected officials. We are their constituents. They have power because we put them in power, and they have an obligation to us. So one thing you can do is raise awareness, share stories, share articles. You can follow each of us on our social media platforms. We're constantly putting content out there, uplifting the voices of our people, and trying to really amplify, unfortunately, their oppression, because it is only that way. That is the only way to connect with people. So raise awareness. Also use your social media platforms to be an advocate. There's so much going on, and share whatever piques your interest. Share whatever is important to you. And this is a humanitarian situation. And we are all neutral. We are nonpartisan. And we really hope that you can use your platform to share the human side of what's happening in Yemen, aside from all the geopolitics, because it is the world's worst humanitarian crisis that we've seen in decades. As well as because we are constituents, we do have a right to consult and give advice to our lawmakers. So please write this number down, 202-224-3121. It is a switchboard that you call and give them your zip code, and then you'll be connected to your lawmaker, your congressional member, and your senators. Leave them a message. You can email them. You can tweet at them. And I will include a toolkit where you can use some of our talking points that will help guide your conversation, because I know this is a lot to take in. But ultimately, the more they hear from their constituents, the more they'll take into consideration, and the more they'll care, because we have to force them to care. So, everyone has a part, and everyone can do something, whether it's directly or indirectly. You can join protests and actions and different events and rallies, and just, whatever it is that you care about, please also incorporate the Yemen cause into what you're doing already, whether it's on social media, whether it's in person. I think the more we get folks talking about it, the more it becomes seen. And lastly, please donate to Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, YRRF. It's the one trusted organization that we support, that we promote. You will constantly see YRRF on the Yemeni Alliance Committee's page, whether on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You can go to their website to be updated on what future campaigns they're going to be working on. But Dr. Aisha and her team are on the ground, and they're all volunteers. There's no overhead costs, so you can be assured that your money is going directly to those in need. And lastly, just follow us. Follow our work. And now we're talking about 5 years. I really hope that we're not going to meet again and talk about the 6th year anniversary of the war in Yemen. Okay, everyone, stay blessed. Take care.